Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Kroll, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar on Like, Share and Incriminate, why social media matters to compliance officers. Firstly, I would like to thank the BCM for the opportunity to host this webinar specifically for the BCM members. Given the increased role of social media as a data point of information, as well as the responses that we have received from compliance managers globally during our most recent Global Fraud and Risk Report, we wanted to take this opportunity to share our experience from the last year in order to address how social media channels can be approached to remediate regulatory and reputational risks for the companies. As this webinar is enhanced by your participation, we would like to encourage you to raise any questions you have throughout the presentation. Our slides will be distributed following the presentation, and should we not have time to address all questions, then please do not hesitate to get in touch with the speakers afterwards. For those who are not familiar with Kroll and our work, please let me briefly introduce you to the company. Founded in 1973, Kroll is a US headquartered corporate investigations company that supports its clients when it comes to compliance, investigations, cybersecurity, and physical security matters. Today, we are speaking to you with our dedicated compliance department, which supports its clients with minimizing their third-party risks in line with Know Your Clients, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery, and anti-corruption regulations. My name is Margaret Frequin, and I am the current point of contact for the BCM at Kroll. I'm, however, delighted to introduce you to your host for today, which is Tom Hollebone, who heads our research team in our EMEA headquarters in London and who leads our internal efforts to develop our social media research methodology. Tom is joined by two senior members of our team, Véronique Foulon and Martin Fischer, who each will utilize their own experiences of case studies, which included social media as a key point of research during this webinar. Tom, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Margaret. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Margaret has mentioned, we wanted to share with you some of our experiences with the risks of social media in the compliance space and what we can do to address some of those risks. So you can see here some of the areas we're going to be covering during the afternoon. As Margaret mentioned, we have a Q&A session at the end, so please do take the time to submit any questions that you may have, and we'll do our very best to answer them at the end. Anything that we don't get to, we will come back to you individually with some responses. But let's start at the beginning. So why social media shouldn't be ignored? And let's talk specifically about how much of a concern it is to you. So if we can move on, thank you very much. You're all here, so we know it's certainly something that's of interest, but we can certainly put it back into some more concrete terms. I'm sure some of you are aware, but Kroll publishes an annual global fraud and risk report, which surveys over 500 different risk management professionals to identify some of the key risks that are presenting themselves to those different organizations. In our most recent report, there was really a massive 27% of our respondents reported that adversarial social media activity had a significant effect on their organization in the last 12 months. So to put this into context, this was more of a common issue than IP theft, bribery and corruption, and money laundering to these organizations. Now, this probably seems quite surprising. When we dig a little deeper, it actually may make some more sense. Information security, bribery and corruption, money laundering, all have set kind of requirements, processes, procedures to hopefully prevent these issues from taking place within organizations. However, for many organizations, the risks of social media have not really been fully mapped out or understood, and therefore the opportunity for these events to occur is arguably higher. So let's move on to a couple of examples. We can see here a couple of examples of social media findings that really would cause concern to a business. These types of findings are regularly picked up by the media and have the potential to cause pretty significant reputational issues, and as a result may require some high-profile remediation action as well. So why is social media important to you as we move on? Well, as we've seen, the reputational damage, the potential for reputational damage can be significant. This could be in the form of a company finding itself on the front pages of newspapers, for example, or the subject of a Twitter storm with some significant short-term pain. Or it could be a longer-term issue. The fallout could affect the share price of a company, or if it's a private company, could impact the shareholders' confidence in the leadership or the direction of the business. It could also discourage other companies from partnering with a company, or could mean withdrawing stock or products or pulling advertising. A more specific impact could be that you could end up bringing a bad hire into the business or creating a toxic work environment, both of which are not quick fixes to make and could cause further collateral damage with staff choosing to leave and potentially leaving bad reviews on workplace review sites like Glassdoor. And with all of this comes the impact of the cost to resolve. There's also the potential that we may need to take legal action against the claim that's made against you, or potentially be involved in litigation relating to a bad hire. But one element that's almost always overlooked is the impact of the distraction on the business. Taking time out of people's day to answer emails, respond to legal firms, deal with the fallout from all of these issues, is taking every single person away from their day job, from what is generating money for their business and allowing them to complete their jobs. So one thing that the mantra that Vero, Martin, and I really carry with us in our line of work is obviously that prevention is better than cure. So in addition to some of these reputational and other adverse risks, in particular for a financial institution as we move on, there may be also some specific regulatory requirements that you may have to conduct and make sure you're conducting open source searches, but also including social media searches as part of that in order to satisfy the regulatory requirements that you have. An example of this is work that needs to be done around source of wealth, which we're going to come on to later with some interesting case studies from Martin and from Vero. So given all these risk factors, what can we do and what should we look out for? So let's move on and look at the size of the challenge that we have to deal with. Firstly, we need to be aware of the size. It is huge. The number of different users and content that can be generated is massive. As you can see here, there are estimated to be over 3.7 billion active social media users. On top of that, each person has on average over 7 social media accounts each. And in 142 minutes in a day, 365 days a year, there's a lot of potential to create a lot of content. But we also need to remember that the content is created at all times of the day, when we're in all different frames of mind. We also tend to surround ourselves with friends and followers who likely share our own views. And what this can do is can lull people into a false sense of security, and the potential to share something more extreme or offensive some more offensive views is there, especially views that may not be said in a conversation that we would normally have kind of day-to-day, face-to-face. And that's partly due to the perception that the internet affords us an element of anonymity. And to an extent, that is true. But if people and companies are careless, that information can be found publicly. So moving on, I wanted to look at the growth of social media and what has happened. Now, I'm sure all of you will join me in agreement that 2020 has felt like a lifetime But for those of us that can remember 2004, it was very much a simpler time. No iPhones, no Twitter. Facebook had just been launched, but wasn't known widely. It was only a student directory for students that are based in Boston. But from this data in front of us, we can see that there is a plethora now of social media platforms where videos, photos, music, or even just thoughts that you're having when you're stuck in traffic can be shared for the world to see. And with the exception of MySpace that you can see on this on the chart here, almost all of those that have gained traction have prospered in the last 10 years or so. But one thing to remember as well is that social media has almost no geographical boundaries. Content is being generated in many different languages, as well as being created on platforms that are specific to certain jurisdictions and regions, like WeChat and Weibo in China, and VK in Russia as well. And here on this slide, we can see much more recent data from 2018 on which of those social media platforms are being used most at the moment. So the size of the problem is certainly one issue that we need to understand. We also need to understand a little bit more about the methodology of searching and where that information is. So let's look at the sources that are being used. I'm sure most people are familiar with the broad concept of the location of information on the internet, but let's discuss that in a little bit more detail. So you can see here we have three different sections. First, and the top, is the surface web. And this is really the part of the web that, that we can see, that we can search through with search engines like Google or Bing. And it's also known as the indexed web, which, as the name suggests, is the web that is structured and allows the search engines to scrutinize the data that's within that to then provide you the results. Some examples of these types of databases, these sources, news and media sites, some forums, and some blogs. So with regards to social media specifically, some social media is searchable at this level, but we're limited in terms of what users consent to being included. And I'm sure some of you will be aware that social media sites offer users the choice of whether they want their data to be included in search results or not. So there is an element of control there. Looking at the bottom layer, which I imagine people are less familiar with, is the dark web. And the dark web is a difficult place to find yourself. You generally need a different browser and different methods to be able to access it. And ultimately, it's not a place you can see from the types of information that's there. It's not really a place that many of us want to frequent. But the middle ground is where there is sometimes a wealth of information that's not as easy to access, but is there for us. The group of sites in this group are still accessible from a normal browser, but they may not show in the search results when using Google or Bing or other search engines. And you may have to navigate your way directly to those sites and perform searches yourself. And some examples of these types of databases, litigation databases, those of you that are familiar with corporate record information, as well as some government resources as well. And social media and other information in this group is much more difficult to access unless you know where to look and how to access that. And one point to stress here is that information in this group is still very much publicly available information, but it may not necessarily be readily available. And that's the key difference. So how do we find someone's social media profiles in this sea of profiles that we talked about earlier? Well, firstly, email addresses and phone numbers are key data points that are usually linked to people's profiles. So if those are available, they can help a lot. But again, that information generally isn't available in the surface web. And if you're interested in conducting the searches discreetly, then this can be even more difficult. If you don't have access to phone numbers or email addresses, it can make it more difficult. But using a combination of known social media profiles, like LinkedIn, for example, and known data points like an employment history, education history, or a place of residence for an individual, it's possible to then develop some further information. So if we move on, once we've gotten over that hurdle, what do we do, once we've identified those individuals? How do we look through those profiles? How do we understand their footprint? Well, luckily for us, as social media usage has increased, so has the processing power and technology solutions available to us. While some people's profiles are relatively small, some can be huge with hundreds of thousands of posts, and all it needs is for one thing in there to contain something that can embarrass your company. And obviously there is a requirement for you to find that, to understand that. So technology really needs to be utilized to make the task manageable. Using machine learning and natural language processing, it makes it possible to review large amounts of data in a relatively quick and efficient manner, including the text, photos, and video content that make up the majority of those social media platforms. That data and confirmed findings can then be fed into the research process to yield better quality results, as well as identifying new information. And social media, of course, is another data source that can be used during that due diligence process. Now, unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to conducting these searches. Each individual and each company that we come across in our line of work has a relatively unique profile. And our experience has taught us that the combination of technology and human input is the most successful at identifying this information of interest. So what we want to do now is take a look at some of the specific instances where conducting social media searches has provided really good value to our clients in the past and has proved vital in helping them to understand and manage the risks that we've identified. So you can see here we have a number of case studies looking at a pre-transactional issue, a topic relating to hiring some senior hires into organization, conflict of interest, insider trading, and source of wealth examples. And then we also want to talk about a couple of situations where social media information helped us understand and identify some sanctions exposure for a couple of clients. So I'm going to pass over to Martin and to Veronique firstly, who will take us through the first case, as well as provide us with a brief overview of our research team. Vero, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. So good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. My name is Vero Foulon, and here at Kroll, a division of Duff & Phelps, I support one of our teams of multilingual compliance due diligence researchers who are experts at mapping out a business or an individual's profile through targeted research of public domain information in available public records, media, litigation, and regulatory information, as well as sector-specific sources. And as a research team, we work alongside many clients, and we conducted research for thousands of due diligence reports, focusing on the risks that your business and you potentially as a compliance officer may face when it relates to the varying degrees of exposure to compliance issues. So here we would like to present you with a couple of specific examples of how our expert screening of social media profiles, social network connections and ramifications in the research of openly and publicly accessible information may help you identify and potentially mitigate your business and compliance team's exposure to certain risks. Whether you are considering information available through the canvassing of open profiles and reviews, or information apparent in openly accessible deep and dark web links and connections that can be mapped out through expert research tools, you may come across a range of exposure, sometimes only articulated through a social media screening. So I would like to start with this following type of exposure, pre-transactional use case, on compliance governance. This may seem at first remote from the direct discovery of regulatory breach or any type of allegations, which would directly relate to money laundering, bribery, and corruption. But there is, however, a higher risk of unethical and non-compliant behaviors, and as a result, compliant breaches in organizations where the culture instilled from the top does not drive the relevant incentives for compliance. So as you can see, of course, here I would like you to think about the many risks deriving from non-compliant culture. What if you are dealing with a third party or client organization with a toxic culture? And Tom mentioned it previously, a toxic culture, a culture of fear leading to untransparent communication, punishment, bullying, and focusing on the wrong business incentives. So I would like to move on to the next slide to present you with a case of a compliance officer at a financial institution who wanted to scrutinize the transaction by her commercial development team to invest into another financial institution which specializes in investment advice and management. So through our standard research process for conducting due diligence inquiries about a target company and its management team, we combined research of public domain and industry source interview information. And our standard process did not uncover relevant litigation cases or a regulatory breach to cause alarm. The human source interviews proved to be difficult, indicating a potential issue that was nonetheless not fully articulated because sources and industry contacts were extremely cautious and reluctant to speak. And subsequent to this standard research, a review of social media information revealed and confirmed reports of a toxic management culture. So as you can see, the information was available through reviews on a social media rating platform on the Surface web. And comments such as unhappy CEO, unhappy office, or cliquey management and toxic culture. So these comments could have been discarded, of course, or taken more lightly if they hadn't been repeated plenty of times, leaving no ambiguity on the challenges of the work culture at the company. So in fact, and as such, the reality of the toxic culture affecting the company could be observed in a number of hints in accessible public records. But the link between those pointers and the negative atmosphere could be articulated once we had conducted this social media review. And we could observe, for instance, a higher than usual turnover of employees, especially in senior and mid-senior management roles. That could be seen in the annual reports of the company. There were reports by sources on the ground that the company had a significant potential for growth, but couldn't achieve it in the current circumstances. And these comments were later translated as the fact that with all obstacles from the toxic type of management removed, this company could do so much better. So finally, reports of significant litigation aimed at the CEOs and the CEO working behavior and culture emerged from confidential sources after the social media review allowed us to consult relevant industry contacts and ask the relevant targeted questions about the reports of a toxic culture. So here, social media can help clarify the risk profile of an individual or business to ensure you invest in compliant governance. And I would like to hand over to my colleague Tom for an example of what social media can tell you in an executive hire screening scenario.
Great, thank you very much, Vera. So I'm sure as everyone hopefully is aware of and practicing themselves, but conducting appropriate screening before you hire an individual into your business is always a worthwhile task, especially at the more senior levels. And you would actually be surprised at how many companies don't have a structured screening process in place for those senior level hires. But it can have a massive impact in terms of preventing hiring of staff that have lied or deceived people about their background. And in some instances, just checking the dates of employment, or even individuals that have been nominated by the potential hire to speak to, and references that they provided, doesn't quite yield all the information that really is needed. And in this case, which has been anonymized, we were asked to screen an individual who was being appointed as the CFO of a business. The dates of his employment and the positions that he held were verified, and the people that he had nominated as referees had given positive feedback, and everyone appeared to be happy with the way that he operated. Our client, who is the potential employer, however, was keen to make sure that that definitely was the case, and had asked us to double check and conduct a review of social media sites and deep web data. And within these searches, we found reference on a discussion group within a site where the subject had been using an alias. Now we managed to link that alias to him using his email address, and through that we identified posts that were completely unacceptable and providing offensive comments about his management style and in particular his views of women. Now, suffice to say, the client decided not to proceed with hiring him and managed to avoid having a situation where bringing him into the organization would have likely created a huge amount of conflict and potential liability from complaints from staff. So the information that we find online can, and through these social media searches, can absolutely help when making these hiring decisions and avoid bringing people into the organization that don't meet your values and uphold your standards. So Martin, would you like to take over and take us through a conflict of interest example?
Yes, of course, and thank you very much, Tom. And also, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from my side. Exactly, I want to run you through one example where social media research has been able to help us identify a conflict of interest. And in this particular case, we were engaged by an engineering company that was seeking to purchase a company to acquire company A, we call it here. And they asked us to help them with some relatively standard routine due diligence on this company. And at first, we didn't find anything too concerning about company A. Everything, at least from a compliance standpoint, seemed fairly routine. Things only started getting a little bit more interesting once we looked into the founder of company A, the person who went on to sell company A to our client. And we used some of our technology solutions to quote unquote go back in time on the founder's social media profiles to see what this person had put in there at the moment, what was in there in the past. And as you can see here now, something that popped out quickly to us was that the founder had recently removed references to a company from its social networking profile. I think you should be able to see it on the slides now. We soon identified this new company, company B, that the same person claimed to have founded and be the COO of, based in Los Angeles. And that got our interest, of course, and we confirmed with the California Secretary of State that company B is still very much active and continues to operate and is in fact owned by the same person. So we started to wonder why he would have removed it from his social networking profiles. And it became evident to us quickly that there's actually quite a big overlap in the operations of company A and company B. And looking into it further, it even seemed like some of the operations of company A had been moved into company B, and company A almost hollowed out. Obviously, this is a huge conflict of interest that the company founder had, and something that our client hadn't been aware of at all, and something that only came to our attention through this social media research. our client, of course, eventually withdrew from this acquisition, didn't purchase company A, neither did they purchase company B. I think they withdrew from the entire relationship. But I think what this shows quite neatly is how social media is not just a display of what is on the ground, but this illustrates quite well how social media is a curated space, something where people present them in a way that they want to be seen, actively and passively, by omitting how they don't want to be seen. And here in this particular example, that's what helped us draw attention to something that was, well, not intended by the social media profile owner, but that we could identify and single out. And with that, I think I'll hand back to Vero, who will talk to us about another case where timelines of social media have been quite illuminating.
Thank you, Martin. And similar to Martin's example of conflict of interest uncovered through social media screening, mapping out network connections can help understand and mitigate risks of insider trading by showing connections between individuals and businesses. So this is particularly, of course, relevant in an IPO situation or when other stock operations are in sight. And as you can see in this example, deep web social media screenings showed connections between individuals at organizations with shareholding events. So, it's a case of a past corporate affiliation being removed from a carrier network profile. And deep web network analysis through specialist metadata aggregators showed this past connection. The company was linked to a listing event with a share price increase, and the individual who had retained connections at the board of the company took part in the listing event. So here again, social media research shows links between individuals and organizations, and this allows you to navigate risk of conflict of interest and insider trading. And I would like to hand over to Martin again for the next example.
Thank you, Vero. The next example that I would like to talk about is one where social media has been essential in identifying a person's source of wealth. We work with a few clients, often it's banks, who have a regulatory requirement to establish the source of wealth of their clients. Often that is, of course, for anti-money laundering purposes. But this is also the case for sort of a less known sector of the economy, and that's gaming and gambling companies. They also have a regulatory requirement to determine that the wealth and the income of their high-risk, high-spending clients is in line with the income that is evident from them, rather than unexplained. And in this particular case that I'd like to talk about, we had a gambling company that approached us to get some more confidence about one of their clients called Maria. Now, our client wanted to handle this very discreetly and didn't want to ask Maria directly for her source of wealth and for her income. That's why they engaged us. But we too, at first, were facing a bit of a conundrum. We mapped out Maria's digital footprint, her public record footprint, and her income, and especially any significant income, didn't appear to be too obvious. On her blog, she described herself as a stay-at-home mother. There was a local newspaper report we came across where it was detailed how she's been a life coach, a volunteer life coach, even for low-income groups. So certainly not something that would attract a high income. We thought we had found a clue when we saw that her social media profiles referenced a horse riding school. We followed up on that. It was based in Spain. We were able to procure information about the school from the Madrid Mercantile Register. And it did turn out that Maria owned that horse riding school, but unfortunately had very little in terms of revenues and even less in profits. So if anything, this was another sign of her wealth and something she spent money on rather than earned very much. The clue only came later when we found that Maria had a social media profile, her Instagram profile, in fact, that was linked to an email address that wasn't in the name of Maria, but someone else called VP. And MEP, as it turned out, is actually the alter ego of Maria. It's her second identity. And VP is quite the prolific influencer, occupying a bit of a niche space with esoteric topics, alternative medicine and the like. But within that space, quite successful, very active on platforms like YouTube, Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, quite heavily monetized. So there's certainly some income coming through that. But VP is also a prolific author. She's got over 30 books that are published. You can buy them on Amazon, sometimes for fairly significant prices, as you can see here. And once this all popped open, once this universe became available to us, suddenly the story of Maria started to make sense. How she had a lot of disposable income. And this really helped our clients gain a lot of comfort in Maria, having the income that she claimed, or that she obviously appeared to have access to, and for this income to be fairly benign, nothing illegal about it. And I think what this case is quite illustrative for is how social media certainly never tells the whole story, but it can be an interesting key. It can help us unlock parts of a story that we hadn't seen previously before, and then allow us to connect the dots. And that's certainly what happened in the case of Maria. And now I'll hand back to Veronique, who will talk us through another case study. Actually, no, I'll speak to another case study. And that's about sanctions. Sanctions, of course, quite a serious topic, something that you don't want to get wrong and find yourself on the wrong side of the regulator. And in this case, we were engaged by a bank who worked with a businessman, or tried to onboard a client, a businessman based in Dubai, but of Iranian descent, who was running his family business out of Dubai. And the bank that we worked for was quite concerned that some of the proceeds of that business could still find their way back in Iran, and that the bank could become complicit in the evasion of sanctions. And because this is such a serious and very delicate matter for the bank, and something where if you get it wrong, the penalties can be quite severe, we approached this issue from quite a few angles. It was a fairly intensive exercise on our part, with a wide range of open source information that we analyzed, as well as interviews with sources we are aware of within the Iranian community in Dubai. But besides that, we also tapped into social media. And we did a fairly detailed mapping and timelining of our person and his connections and family members. When have they lived in Iran? Where have they studied? When have they moved elsewhere? Where have they moved? What have they discussed in comments on social media profiles? What kind of photos have they been tagged on? When, where, with whom? And all of this ultimately helped us confirm what this businessman already had disclosed to the bank. It wasn't revealing any new, adverse information, but it was a useful tool in that it helped us corroborate information, and gave the bank a lot more comfort in this relationship with the businessman. I think oftentimes that's one of the reasons we may go to social media, not to find new revelations, but instead to corroborate information, to make sure there isn't anything else that we might have missed, and to see that the puzzle pieces really align in the way that we believed before. And I think I'll hand back to Tom now. No, actually, sorry, in this case, I'll hand back to Veronique to talk us through another case where sanctions analysis is where we use social media research.
Thank you, Martin. And this is another example of how social media screening of surface deep and dark web can support your compliance operations by helping identify risks. So in that case, and of course I keep it vague for anonymity reasons, we worked on the merger of a medical group. So we researched the operations of a healthcare group, and in addition to our coverage of the medical operations subsidiaries to be merged, our client's compliance officer requested that we conduct our standard public record research into members of the board and of the main subsidiary. So we also conducted a social media screening of the subsidiary and its board members with the aim of identifying any further relevant risk points on the company standing, its work culture, and its operations. And as we mapped out the operations, we came across undisclosed operations in jurisdictions with exposure to sanctions. We found reports through links between social media profiles of affiliate entities supplying and working with sanctions research centers, which had been involved in the use of chemical weapons in the sanctions jurisdiction. So as you can see through this example of exposure to sanctioned activities, social media screening can uncover relatively unexpected but potentially high in severity risks to your organization. And on that note, I would like to hand over to Tom.
Great, thank you very much both for those examples. Very, very insightful, and it's good to see kind of how we can apply those searches to real life instances. So, also wanted just to cover very briefly when else can social media searching provide value. Now, if you're having trouble locating an individual to try and verify their credentials, you're expecting to see some information, then detailed social media searches can potentially provide some insight. So, for example, if an individual is portraying themselves as a well-connected, prominent business person, but they have no online profile, that's potentially a concern. There's a discrepancy there. That social media can sometimes help to address that. But also, if you know that someone uses different names for some reason, if you found an alias, if things don't match up, if the email address doesn't match the business card or the CV or anything like that, it's a great reason to see what else may be out there. There may be a reason for that. Why are they using two different names? Why are they using an alias? Why are they known differently online to how they are in person? And social media or deep web searching can sometimes shed light on unexplained gaps in someone's activities. So directorships, trading pages for companies, or simply cached social media information can be found to fill those gaps. In the same way as in Martin's example, we managed to find another profile for a conflict of interest issue. It can also be used to cover up periods of employment where someone was maybe fired, or they've lied about their dates and they're covering up a gap when they were not doing something or doing something they wanted to hide. But in these situations, the next question to answer is, why do they not disclose this? What is the reason for them trying to hide this? And last but certainly not least, if you're going to hire, partner with, or trust someone with you or your company's reputation, it's best practice to make sure you understand their reputation. If they're going to be publicly linked to you, then understanding if they have anything embarrassing or controversial that others could find is a key risk point to address. So lastly, we wanted to leave you with some key points to take away and consider. So social media is relatively new compared to other data sources, but as we've seen, it can be a huge help in finding information of interest, especially when it's paired with other due diligence activities, whether that be open source searches, public record information, or even whether it's with human sources on the ground providing insight. And as we've seen, even this morning, an individual social media posting was used as an indication of wealth by the UK law enforcement authorities. And the individual in question couldn't prove where all of this wealth had come from, couldn't prove that it came from a legitimate source. and as a result has had to forfeit £10 million worth of property because he can't explain where it's come from. Now, his social media profiles and postings and bragging drew attention from the money laundering investigators, and although they couldn't prove that he had laundered money directly, using the other tools available, they proved using his social media that he wasn't able to explain where that had come from a legitimate reason, and made a big contribution to the seizure of that wealth that he'd accumulated. But social media can also be extremely helpful in connecting data points that were previously hidden or difficult to find. And sometimes what better source is there from the individuals themselves disclosing those connections? That can really help to connect those data points. And lastly, to be able to deal with vast amounts of data, to be able to search in the right places and to take a structured approach to reviewing that data in a cost-effective and ultimately in a timely manner, a technology-enabled solution really is essential to doing that consistently across those searches that you may be doing. So that really concludes. Thank you very much for your time today. We'd like to open the floor to any questions that have come in. Margaret, have we had anything from the attendees?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Vera, and thank you, Martin, for the presentation. We've got a few questions come in through the question queue, and I'd like to encourage everybody, if you have questions now, please do ask them through the system, or afterwards we'll make the details of the speakers available to you so you can reach out to them directly. The first question we got was actually during your slides, Tom, when you were talking about the sources of where to access sources. And the question is there a GDPR issue when searching such profiles, referring to the social media profiles you were talking about at that moment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The answer is absolutely. Of course, all of the relevant data protection laws have to be followed, whether that's GDPR when we're working in Europe or whether that's other laws in different countries. One thing that we can say is that we never hack into someone's profile, or we never engineer our way into someone's profile by creating a friend request or following them to be able to access that information. That's it's against a number of data protection laws. It's also unethical, and that's not something that we will partake in. If an individual has made their profiles, if they made everything private and they've not consented to their data being shared on search results, like I mentioned before, sometimes we have to accept there's little that we can do there. We can try and find other information that is in the public domain. If people comment on other profiles that aren't made private, then that information may come to light. But we'll highlight that in our report, and we make sure that we explain any limitations that we've had during our process. One thing to take into account, I suppose, from a risk perspective, if we can't find the information or you can't find the information, then that maybe provides some comfort, I suppose, in that someone else shouldn't be able to find that information either, and that may go some way to removing some of the potential for reputational risk coming out. But on the flip side, it means that another data point is out there that potentially can't be analyzed. But yeah, it's a limitation that we have to deal with, and something that we have to kind of work our way around, but within the data protection laws and within the ethics of what we're doing.
Thank you, Tom. We received a second question during your slides, Vera, when you were talking about the use case pre-transaction, especially when you were talking about company culture. The question is, how do you check the validity of subjective information from social media? This information can be true, but it can also 50% be untrue.
Thank you, Margaret. That's a very good question. I'm not sure I heard everything. There was a slight delay on the line here. If I understood correctly, it's about checking the validity of the information. It's not always valid. What is found on a social media profile. However, here it's a question of appointments being removed, previous appointments or connections to a company being removed. Oh, sorry. I'm thinking about the slide on the pre-transaction. So that's the slide on the compliant governance, correct? So in that case, of
Correct.
course, yeah, of course. So maybe I hinted to this previously, but we tried and canvassed sources again after we had found such information, and that's when industry sources, which are reputable, and that is because we of course vet these sources and we understand clearly who we are dealing with, could then confirm this information, but wouldn't have spoken about this if we hadn't asked the targeted questions, and we could only ask these targeted questions because of the numerous comments that were found in that case very easily. However, this is not necessarily directly accessible on the surface web always, and sometimes it's openly accessible, but of course needs specific tools to access information like that.
Yeah, and just to
Thank you,
add
Vero.
to Vero's comments there, yeah, I think for those of you on the phone that are familiar with, maybe have conducted due diligence in your in past roles, or regular kind of users of due diligence reports, that you should understand and be familiar with the idea of kind of triangulation of data and information. We never just kind of report something from one data point without going and trying to verify it in many other places. So to Vero's point, we've managed then to take the information that we had learned from social media and verify it with the sources. And only if we are, if we go out and do all of that and we still don't get any verification, well, that's then on us to make sure that we demonstrate that clearly to our client, what we have done, what the limitations are of that data, and then hopefully, the end user, the client, the decision maker, can then bear that in mind when making that decision.
And just to add to this very briefly, once we had conducted this research triangulating the information, what was really interesting is that we had a level of certainty around the comments made, and these comments could explain what we had already seen in the public record. As I mentioned, the high turnover of employees and a number of other elements that were up to then hidden or not fully visible or explainable.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Tom. We got another two-part question. So this one is a little bit longer. Is somebody suspicious who has no social profile at all? And how do you deal with your own profile? What do you personally share on social media? I'm assuming looking from our point of view if we would research somebody. So a bit more broad.
Well, I wonder if someone's been active while we've been speaking, and that's a loaded question. And Martin, Vera, please feel free to jump in. I mean, in terms of whether someone's suspicious because they don't have a social media profile, no, that's certainly not the case. We know that not everyone uses social media, and we know that there's some people either keep that extremely private, or they just don't want to partake in it. We don't see that as suspicious. We look at the data that we have in front of us and we make a determination from that. So if, for example, we are being asked to look at an individual because they are a social media influencer, for example, we're expecting to see large amounts of social media traffic. If that person is saying, "Oh, I'm an influencer," and then we find a non-public profile that has a small number of followers, that's where the discrepancy is, and that's where we would highlight that to our clients. An absence of profile on its own is not kind of an area of concern, I wouldn't say. Very sorry, please add.
No, yeah, I just wanted to add as well that it's always you know, in our line of work, no information is also very interesting. What does it say about someone or a specific business? It's very common for subjects from a much older generation not to have a social media profile.
Yes. But on the topic of what is suspicious, certainly if we look at someone who claims to be very prominent, very successful, then this person may decide for themselves not to have profiles, but at least you would expect other people to talk about the person or the business. So for there to be some sort of passive profile. And that is certainly one angle that we consider.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question. This is also a two-part question, a little bit longer. How do you deal with the issue of information overload from not only one social media source, but across all surface, deep, and potentially dark web sources? There's so much information out there. How do you even know where to look, especially for non-surface sources?
Yeah, I mean that's a very good question. Where we know how to look is something that we have developed over a number of years with our experience. And one of the benefits of being a specialist firm is that we do this day in, day out. We're very familiar with the sources that we use. We're constantly looking at new sources that we can bring on. But as the question really suggests, it's not an easy task. Looking through large amounts of data is really kind of one of the limitations of human beings. We only have a certain attention threshold, but it takes time as well. We can only work at a certain pace. So one of the points I mentioned earlier, we for these types of situations, the benefit of machine learning, and in particular natural language processing, can really cut down the amount of time that is spent. We're not in a position where we have to scroll through thousands and thousands and thousands of posts to find what we need. We can use those tools to help push that information right to the top of the research process for us, so that we're already analyzing the elements that we want to that we need to review, the ones that are going to provide the most value or the most concern. So this is really where technology comes into its own, and is a massive benefit, particularly when there's so much data out there.
Thank you so much. And one very tiny last question. Is there a specific German regulation that requires social media search as part of compliance?
Maybe I'll say something about that. Well, there isn't much in terms of specific regulations for the due diligence compliance world specific on social media. But at the same time, as Tom mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, social media has been around for quite a while now, and regulators, including in Germany, have been clued up to it by now. They do expect this to be part of a compliance program, and there's some very specific and concrete evidence about that too. We've seen, for example, BaFin make very concrete announcements talking directly about places like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, where they feel that BaFin has supervision over certain communications that happen on these platforms. There have been cases where BaFin has sanctioned companies for mischaracterizing themselves on social media. So it's certainly something that's very much in the eyes of the regulators in Germany, and not something that can be ignored any longer.
Thank you so much, Martin. That is all the questions I received. But again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to the speakers afterwards. Their details are here, and we will make sure that everybody who attended the webinar receives a copy of these slides, so you have them for your records. At this moment, all I can say is thank you so much for joining us for this BCM webinar. And if there's any questions, we're of course happy to help. Otherwise, we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.